The phone rang at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, and some part of me already knew before I answered that my life was about to split into a before and an after. "Mrs. Sennett? It's Roscoe Pruitt. I sold you the house on Winding Creek." His voice wasn't the polished, apologetic tone I remembered from closing day. It was tight, careful. A man choosing each word like it might cut him on the way out. "Mr. Pruitt, is everything all right? I need to see you. Tonight, if you can. Alone." A pause, longer than it should have been. "Don't bring your husband." My stomach dropped before my mind caught up to why. "I'm Thalia Croft Sennett. I built a real estate firm out of my father's dyeing company and turned it into something this city respects. I don't scare easy. I've sat across from men trying to take my business, my name, my peace, and I've walked out the other side of every single one of those rooms standing taller than when I walked in. But something in Roscoe Pruitt's voice that night reached past all of that and found the part of me that was still just a woman with a family to protect. I met him in the parking lot of a Waffle House off Piedmont, engine running, hands shaking on the wheel, though I told myself it was just the cold. He got in my passenger seat without ceremony, an old flash drive sitting in his palm like it weighed more than metal should. "I forgot to disconnect one of the cameras before you moved in," he said. "The one in the pool house. It's been recording to my old cloud account this whole time. I only found it by accident." "Recording what?" He didn't answer right away. He turned the drive over once in his hand, like he was still deciding something. "I thought about calling the police before I called you," he said. "Then I thought about how that looks. An old man who sold a house still had a live camera running on the people who bought it. Nobody's going to hear that and think I'm the one who did something decent. They're going to wonder what I was doing watching in the first place." He shook his head. "So, I'm bringing it to you instead. Quietly, because you deserve to see it before anybody else decides what it means." "I saw your husband," he said quietly, "and I saw your daughter. I watched maybe 40 seconds of it before I had to stop. I couldn't sit on this. If you're watching this and you already have a bad feeling in your stomach like I did that night, drop your city below. I want to know how far this story is reaching before I tell you what was on that drive. I didn't sleep on it. I drove straight home, waited until Norwood was upstairs in the shower, and locked myself in my office with my laptop, and that drive like it was something that might go off. The footage was grainy, time-stamped, ordinary at first. Just the pool house, empty, moonlight through the blinds. Then movement. Then two shapes I recognized faster than I wanted to. My hand went to my mouth before my brain finished processing what my eyes already knew. I sat there long after the screen went black, my whole body cold in a way no thermostat could fix, replaying it, needing it to be a mistake, needing there to be some explanation that didn't mean what it so clearly meant. And then, somewhere underneath the shock, a small, sharp detail surfaced, one I hadn't let myself look at directly yet. That wasn't our bedroom in the footage. It wasn't anywhere in the main house at all. It was the pool house, the one Aveline had been staying in for the better part of a year. My daughter's room. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than the footage itself. I sat in my office chair until the sun came up, watching that same 40 seconds over and over, until the shock burned itself down into something colder and more useful. By the time Norwood's alarm went off upstairs, I had already made a decision I didn't say out loud to anyone. I wasn't going to react. I was going to look. I went back into the drive Roscoe had given me, past the one clip he'd sent, into the folder structure behind it. He'd only shown me 40 seconds, but the account held more. Weeks of footage, automatically archived, most of it nothing. Aveline reading, Aveline on the phone. Ordinary, boring, safe. Then I started checking dates instead of watching randomly, and the ground under me shifted again. This hadn't started recently. The earliest clip that mattered was dated 4 months back. 4 months of a pattern I'd walked past every single day without seeing it, because I trusted the two people in my house completely enough to never look twice. My hands were steady. That unsettled me more than shaking would have. I felt myself narrowing, the grief folding itself into something quieter and sharper, like my body understood before my mind did that falling apart wasn't going to protect my daughter. Watching would. I went through Aveline's things next, not proud of it, telling myself I was looking for anything that could explain this, anything that made it make sense. In the drawer of her old desk, still in the main house from before she moved to the pool house, I found a folder of paperwork she must have forgotten was there. A retreat. Wellness and recovery, the brochure said. Glossy photos of a lake house somewhere in the North Georgia mountains. A receipt clipped to the back, paid in full, $11,000. I never approved that. I never even heard about it. I told myself there could be an explanation. Maybe a friend paid. Maybe Aveline had saved for it herself, wanting privacy about something personal, ashamed to ask her mother for help the way 26-year-olds sometimes are. I wanted that explanation so badly, I almost convinced myself of it standing right there in her old room. Then I turned the receipt over and saw the billing entity printed along the bottom in small gray letters. Not a person's name, a company. Meridian Wellness Holdings, LLC. I didn't recognize it, but something about the phrasing, the particular clean corporate blandness of it, made my stomach turn before my mind caught up with why. I sat down at my laptop again, this time not for the footage, but for the Secretary of State's business registry, my fingers moving faster than my breathing. I typed the company name in, hit search, and watched the page load like it was taking its time on purpose. Registered agent, a law firm downtown. The same firm, I realized after a moment of staring, that Norwood used for his own personal business matters. Organizer, listed plainly on the filing, Norwood Senate. It didn't prove he owned the company outright. A filing like that only meant he'd been the one to submit the paperwork, nothing more, not on its face. But paired with the law firm, paired with the receipt in my hand, it was enough to tell me exactly where to keep looking. I sat very still in my daughter's old bedroom, the brochure in one hand and the receipt in the other, and understood for the first time that whatever this was, it hadn't happened by accident and it hadn't happened once. It had been built, quietly, patiently, for months, right under my roof, by the man sleeping upstairs who still didn't know I knew any of it yet. I brought banana pudding to the pool house the next afternoon, the way I'd done 100 times before, and told myself I was just a mother checking on her daughter. Aveline opened the door before I finished knocking, like she'd been standing there waiting for something, though not for me. Her hair wasn't done. That alone stopped me for a second, because Aveline had never once in her life let anyone see her without her hair done. Not since she was 14 years old and decided that was simply who she was going to be. Mama. She said it warm enough, but her eyes didn't quite land on mine. They kept sliding past me, toward the driveway, like she was checking who else might be walking up behind me. Brought your favorite, I said, holding up the dish, keeping my voice easy, the voice I use in negotiations when I need the other side to believe I'm not paying close attention. She let me in. The pool house was tidier than I expected, almost aggressively so, like someone had cleaned it recently and thoroughly. I sat at the little kitchen table while she got bowls down, and I watched her hands the whole time. They weren't steady. Small tremors, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking for them, the kind she covered by keeping her hands busy every second. You've lost weight, I said. I've been better about eating clean. She smiled when she said it, but it didn't sit right on her face, like a smile she'd practiced instead of felt. We talked about nothing for a while, her job, a coworker she couldn't stand, a movie she hadn't seen but wanted to. I let her lead. I've learned in 30 years of business that the person who talks the least in a room usually learns the most. She kept glancing at her phone, face down on the counter, like she was waiting on something or someone. "You seem tired, baby," I said gently. "Everything okay with you?" "I'm fine." Too fast. Too clean. The way a door closes too quickly when someone's trying not to let you see what's on the other side of it. I decided to test something. Softly. The way you'd test a bruise to see how deep it goes. "Norwood mentioned you two had lunch last week." Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Just for a second. Just long enough. "Yeah," she said, setting it back down. He's been helping me with something. It's private. Mama? I don't really want to get into it right now." "Helping you with what?" "It's not a big deal." Her voice had an edge now, thin and quick. The kind people use when a question lands somewhere they don't want it landing. "He's just been really supportive, more than you'd think." I watched her say it and understood, with a horror I had to swallow whole and keep off my face, that whatever supportive meant in that sentence, my daughter believed it. She wasn't lying to protect a secret from me. She was defending something she didn't know needed defending against. I stayed another 20 minutes, talked about nothing else that mattered, hugged her at the door longer than she probably expected. She flinched, just barely, when I said Norwood's name again on my way out, asking her to tell him I said hello. I drove 2 blocks before I had to pull over, both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing, understanding for the first time that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my money. I was fighting for my daughter's mind. Cordelia Duval's office still smelled like fresh paint from her last renovation, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries once I sat down across from her desk. "You said this was urgent," she said, sliding her glasses up. "Talk to me." I'd known Cordelia 11 years since she helped me fight off a partner who tried to squeeze me out of my own company with a badly worded buyout clause. She'd never once looked at me the way she looked at me that morning, like she already suspected whatever I was about to say was going to be bad. I told her enough. Not everything. I wasn't ready to say the word affair out loud yet, not even to her. But enough about Norwood's finances, enough about a company called Meridian Wellness Holdings, enough for her to understand I needed her to look at something specific. "I need you to pull the trust documents," I said. "My father's trust, all of it." She was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a lawyer who already knows something you don't. "Thalia." She said my name carefully. "Do you remember, about 3.5 years ago, when you had me update the successor trustee provisions?" I remembered signing paperwork. I remembered being newly married, wanting Norwood to feel like family, not an outsider standing at the edge of something that had been built before him. I remembered him saying, gently, over dinner one night, that it would ease his mind to know he could step in and help if anything ever happened to me, that he never wanted me carrying that weight alone. "I named him successor trustee," I said slowly, watching her face rather than my own memory. "In case something happened to me." "You did." She turned her monitor toward me, and 8 months ago, he formally inquired with the trust's original drafting firm, not about changing who benefits. A trustee can't do that on his own. But about the incapacity provisions. What happens to a beneficiary's share, and who gains control of managing it, if that beneficiary is found unable to handle their own affairs? I felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. Unable to handle their affairs, meaning what? Meaning if a beneficiary were declared incapacitated, mentally or otherwise, The trust allows a trustee discretion over how that share gets managed on their behalf. She leaned forward. Thalia, nobody inquires about a clause like that on a whim. Someone asks that question when they're already thinking about how to use it. I sat with that, running the timeline in my head, counting backward the way you count contractions when you already know what's coming. When exactly? 8 months ago? She checked the file, gave me a date. I didn't need a calendar to know what that date meant. That was the same week, almost to the day, that Aveline had moved into the pool house, unmoored after her breakup, taking the space Norwood himself had suggested for her. I drove home that evening rehearsing my own face in the rearview mirror, practicing looking like a woman who didn't know anything at all. Norwood was at the kitchen island when I walked in, scrolling his phone, not looking up right away. Long lunch, he said, an edge under the casualness that hadn't been there a month ago. Client thing, I said. Boring. He looked up then, just for a second too long, studying me in a way he never used to bother with. Like some instinct in him had started quietly checking the locks. You've been different lately, he said. Distracted. Work, I said, and walked past him toward the stairs, my pulse loud in my own ears, understanding for the first time that whatever he'd built, he'd started building it the very same week he handed my daughter a house to disappear into. Norwood told me Thursday he had a late meeting downtown, some vendor renewal for one of his consulting contracts, home by 9 at the latest. I used to take a man's schedule at face value. I don't do that anymore. I called the number listed for that firm at 6:40, using my business voice, asking to confirm a meeting time for a Norwood Senate. The receptionist paused just long enough before she said there was no meeting on their calendar under that name for that week at all. I didn't confront him when he walked in at 9:20, tie loosened, telling me traffic had been brutal off the connector. I just watched him say it, watched how easily the lie came, how it didn't even disturb his face on the way out of his mouth. A year ago, I would have believed every word. That night, I filed it away like evidence, which I suppose is exactly what it was. What I didn't know until 2 days later was that he'd been doing his own quiet checking. I noticed it Saturday morning. A faint scuff of dirt near the old security panel bolted to the pool house's exterior wall, the one Roscoe had told us was decommissioned before we ever moved in. The panel's cover was slightly askew, not broken, just not sitting flush the way it had the week before. Someone had opened it and closed it back, careful, but not careful enough to fool a woman who now noticed everything. I understood, standing there, that Norwood must have felt the same shift in me that I'd felt in him. He'd gone out there himself, satisfied himself the camera was truly dead, reassured by whatever he found, unaware that the footage he was checking for had already left the property months before he ever thought to look. That gave me something almost as useful as proof. It told me he was scared enough to check. I spent that Sunday going back through the wellness retreat paperwork, this time focused only on the address, a location listed vaguely as North Georgia Campus, with no suite number, no website that loaded properly, nothing but a phone number that rang 4 times before disconnecting. I searched the address against property records instead, cross-referencing until I found the actual parcel, not a lake house at all, but a converted single-family home an hour north of the city, zoned residential, no business license on file with the county for anything resembling wellness services. I told Norwood I was driving up to look at land near Dahlonega for a potential development site. It wasn't entirely a lie. I have learned this past month that the best cover is always half true. The house sat back from the road behind a chain-link fence, ordinary, almost forgettable. The The kind of place you'd drive past 100 times without a second look. 2 cars in the gravel driveway. A minivan I didn't recognize. And beside it, unmistakable, the black Audi with the vanity plate I'd stared at across 100 ordinary mornings. Norwood's car. I sat in my own vehicle at the end of that dirt road for a long time, engine off, hands in my lap, feeling the last soft edge of doubt finally give way to something harder underneath it. Whatever this place really was, my husband wasn't just funding it from a distance. He was here. It took me 4 days to find someone who used to work inside that house, and another 2 to convince her to talk to me at all. Her name was Denise, and she met me at a diner outside Gainesville instead of anywhere near that property, sitting with her back to the wall like she wanted to see the door at all times. She'd worked there 8 months, she said, before she quit and didn't look back. It's not licensed, she told me, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't drink. Not as a treatment center, not as anything. County doesn't even know it exists as what it is. What is it then? She looked at me for a long moment, deciding something. A place rich men send people they want handled quietly. No records that follow you anywhere official. No insurance paperwork. Cash only. I asked how someone paid cash for something that expensive without raising questions. He'd come with envelopes, she said. Never wrote a check. Never used a card. Not once the whole time I worked there. Sometimes he'd come by 2, 3 times in a week just to drop money, separate from the actual visits. Struck me as strange even then. A man that careful about how he paid didn't strike me as a man who forgot things easily. I already knew, sitting there, that Cordelia would want that detail more than almost anything else I'd brought her yet. Whatever the exact pattern turned out to be once the bank records came out in the legal process, a man handling payments this deliberately wasn't an accident. Tell me about my daughter, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Denise's face changed, softened in a way that told me whatever came next, she'd been carrying it since she quit. Aveline came in different than she left. Every single time, she said. First few visits, she was just sad. Heartbroken sad, the kind you see a lot in a place like that. Talking, crying some, but all there, herself. She paused. By the 3rd or 4th visit, she wasn't all there anymore. Slower. Confused about things she shouldn't have been confused about. Your husband would sit with her a long time in the back room. Staff wasn't allowed in during those sessions. I felt something rise up my throat that wasn't quite nausea and wasn't quite rage, some new thing built from both of them at once. What was he giving her? I never saw exactly what, Denise said carefully. I wasn't allowed near that room. But I know what a person looks like walking in, and I know what she looked like walking out. And those weren't the same person by the end of it. She shook her head slowly. I've seen enough of this life to know when somebody's being changed on purpose. That wasn't therapy. That was something being done to her. I sat with my hands flat on the table, steadying myself against the wood like it might hold me up if I let it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why not before? Because I quit for a reason, she said, and because your daughter isn't the only young woman I ever saw him bring through that door. The diner noise kept going around us, forks and coffee cups and somebody's radio playing low behind the counter, ordinary sounds from an ordinary afternoon, while I sat frozen in the middle of it, trying to understand what she'd just told me. Aveline wasn't the first. Cordelia called me on a Tuesday morning with a voice I'd never heard her use before, quiet in a way that told me to sit down before she said anything else. Norwood was married before you, she said, briefly, 9 years ago. I don't know why it never came up, but it's a matter of public record if you know where to look. And it ended fast. 18 months, no children of his own. But his wife at the time had a daughter from a previous relationship. 19 years old when the marriage ended. I felt the floor tilt slightly under a chair that hadn't moved. What happened? There's no lawsuit on file, no criminal case, just a private settlement filed under seal, and a name that shows up once in an old civil docket before disappearing behind a non-disclosure agreement? Cordelia paused. I found the ex-wife, not the daughter directly, the mother. I reached out yesterday, and she hung up on me twice before she'd even hear who I was. I understood that reaction more than Cordelia probably did. A woman doesn't hang up twice on a stranger unless the thing being asked about still has teeth. It took 3 more days before Cordelia called back with anything. The woman's name was Patrice, and when she finally agreed to a longer conversation, she told Cordelia plainly that she was terrified, not of a lawsuit, but of Norwood himself, of what he was capable of when he felt cornered, of what he'd already shown himself capable of once before. She kept asking if the NDA meant she'd go to jail for talking, Cordelia told me. I explained that once there's an active legal proceeding and she's called to testify under it, an agreement like hers can't be used to block truthful testimony about criminal conduct, not the way people assume it can. Talking to me privately was one thing. Testifying under subpoena, once we have a real case open, gives her real protection. Did she believe you? Eventually, I told her what's happening with your daughter, in general terms, no names beyond his. That's what moved her, more than anything about the law. She said, and I'm quoting her exactly, "I always wondered if there'd be another one." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, saying nothing, feeling something settle into place inside me that was heavier than shock and steadier than grief. This wasn't an aberration. This wasn't greed twisting a decent man under enough pressure. This was a method, a quiet, patient, repeatable method, refined once already on a 19-year-old girl who'd had no father in the picture to notice what was happening to her, perfected now on my own daughter, who had a mother who wouldn't stop looking until she understood every piece of it. Will she talk to me directly? I asked. Not through documents, not through you, me. Cordelia hesitated. She's scared, Thalia. Scared enough that this needs to be handled carefully, not rushed. I understand that. She said she'd consider it. She wants a few days. I hung up the phone and sat in my office a long time afterward, calculating something I hadn't let myself calculate before. Not just what Norwood had done, but how long he'd been practicing doing it, and how much of a head start he already had on covering it the second time. If Patrice agreed to talk, I needed to reach her before Norwood ever sensed she existed to me at all. Norwood poured 2 glasses of wine that Friday night without me asking, which should have told me something all by itself. He never poured mine unless he wanted something or wanted to soften me up before saying something he already knew I wouldn't like. "You've been somewhere else lately," he said, sliding the glass across the island toward me. "In your head, I mean. Work?" "Always work," I said, and took the glass, keeping my face arranged the way I'd practiced arranging it for weeks now. "You sure that's all it is?" He watched me over the rim of his own glass, a small, careful smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Feels like more than that." "What would it be, Norwood?" He shrugged. Too casual. The kind of casual a man performs when he's rehearsed the moment in his head more than once. "I don't know. You've been distant, distracted. Frankly, a little paranoid, if I'm honest. Checking things. Asking around about people you have no reason to be asking around about." My pulse ticked up, but I kept my hand steady around the stem of the glass. "I don't know what you mean." "Cordelia Duval," he said, watching my face the way a man watches a poker table. You've had a lot of meetings with your attorney lately for someone who says everything's fine at home. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there, the way I do in negotiations when the other side has said more than they meant to and doesn't yet realize it. She's my attorney, I said finally. I meet with her about the business. That's not new. No, he agreed, too easily. But this feels different. He set his glass down, and something in his posture shifted, the charm sliding just slightly off its hinges. Whatever you think you're building, Thalia, I want you to think very carefully before you go any further with it. Is that a threat? It's a fact. His voice stayed level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Because if this ever ends up in a courtroom, for any reason, the first thing anyone's going to ask is why Aveline's been so unstable lately. Why she needed a retreat in the first place. What kind of judgment a mother has, letting her daughter get that unwell without noticing. He paused, letting that land exactly where he meant it to. I'd hate for anyone to start asking those kinds of questions about you. The wine turned sour in my mouth, though I didn't let it show on my face. He wasn't threatening to expose himself. He was threatening to weaponize the very damage he'd caused, turning Aveline's condition into evidence against my fitness rather than his guilt. You should be careful, I said quietly, assuming you know what I'm building. I'm not assuming anything. He picked his glass back up, turned toward the window like the conversation was already over, already beneath him. I'm just telling you, as your husband, that I've spoken to someone too. Family law, mostly. Just to understand where things stand, in case anything ever, God forbid, needed to go that direction. He said it lightly, like a passing comment about the weather, but I heard exactly what it was. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was preparing. I called Cordelia first thing Monday morning and told her it was time. Not another meeting to gather more evidence quietly. It was time to actually open the case. Divorce petition and a civil complaint both, filed and on record, so that whatever came next would happen inside a courtroom instead of across a kitchen island. Once we file, Cordelia said, there's no undoing it. He'll know for certain. He already knows, I said. He's just been waiting to see if I'd flinch first. And somewhere in the last few weeks, without my ever seeing it happen, my husband had quietly built himself a legal defense before I'd even found the words to name what I was defending my daughter against. I waited until Norwood left for a Saturday golf game he'd had on his calendar for weeks, and then I drove straight to the pool house before I could talk myself out of it. Aveline answered the door in sweats, surprised to see me without notice, and something in her face went guarded before I'd even said a word. Mama, I wasn't expecting... I need to talk to you, I said. Just us. It's important. She let me in, arms crossed, already bracing for something. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen different ways driving over, and none of them survived the moment I actually sat down across from my daughter and had to find the words. I need you to hear me all the way through, I said, before you say anything back. I told her what I'd found, not a list, not a case laid out point by point, just the truth of it in the plainest words I had. That Norwood had been changing her on purpose, slowly, in ways she couldn't see from the inside of it. That I had proof. That this had happened before to someone else, long before either of us knew him. Aveline's face didn't crumble the way I'd braced for. It hardened. You had someone follow me? Her voice came out sharp, faster than I expected. You went through my things. You're talking to people about my private business like I'm some kind of case you're building? Baby, I'm trying to protect you. From what? She stood up, arms tight across her chest. From the one person in this house who's actually been there for me? Do you know how many nights you were in Charlotte while Norwood sat with me? actually listened to me, actually noticed when I was falling apart? Where were you, Mama? The words landed exactly where she meant them to, precise and cutting. The particular cruelty only a child who knows your guilt can deliver. Aveline, he's been giving you something, changing you. I know it for a fact now. Or maybe, she cut in, voice shaking now, you can't stand that somebody else stepped up when you were too busy building your empire to be my mother. Maybe this isn't about protecting me. Maybe it's about you not being able to stand that I don't need you the way I used to. I felt that one go all the way through me, past every defense I had, straight to the guilt I'd carried since she was 11 years old, and I was choosing between a recital and a closing. That's not what this is, I said, my voice breaking despite everything I'd practiced. Isn't it? She was crying now, angry tears, the kind that come from somewhere much older than the argument itself. You don't get to swoop in with all this, like I'm too stupid to see what's happening in my own life. I love him. He's helped me, and you can't stand it. Aveline, please, I need you to leave. I stood there another moment, reaching for something, anything, that might undo the last 5 minutes. Nothing came. She grabbed her keys off the counter before I could say another word, pushed past me out the door, and got into her car, driving toward the front of the property, toward the main house, toward Norwood. I stood alone in the pool house doorway, my own daughter's accusations still ringing in my ears, understanding with a grief sharper than anything the footage had given me that loving her correctly wasn't going to be enough. I needed to be smarter than her love for him. Patrice agreed to meet at a little cafe in Marietta, a neutral place neither of us had any history with, and she was already seated in the back corner when I walked in, watching the door the way people watch doors when they've spent years learning not to trust rooms. You look like her, she said, before I'd even sat down. Aveline, I saw a picture once, years back. You have the same eyes. I hadn't expected that to be the first thing she said, and it nearly undid the composure I'd walked in with. Thank you for meeting me, I said instead. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this has ever been easy. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. I signed something, a long time ago, telling myself it was over, that walking away with money meant walking away with my life back. Cordelia explained that the agreement wouldn't hold, given... I know what she explained. Patrice's voice sharpened, not at me, but at the memory itself. I've had 9 years to think about all the ways that agreement was never really about protecting my daughter. It was about protecting him. We sat with that a moment, 2 women who'd never met before that morning, bound together by a man neither of us fully understood until it was too late. There's something else, Patrice said. And something in her posture went very still. I got a call 3 days ago, from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. Norwood? She nodded slowly. He didn't say much at first. Asked how I'd been. Like we were old friends catching up. Then he mentioned he'd heard through mutual people that I might be talking to someone about old business. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do to help smooth things over. Financially, if it came to that. He offered you money. He offered me a lot of money, Patrice said. More than the first time. He was very careful about how he said it. Nothing you could record and call a bribe outright. Just a concerned old acquaintance, checking in, mentioning he'd always want to help an old friend who might be going through something. I felt something cold and clarifying settle into place, replacing whatever nerves I'd walked in with. You said no. I said I'd think about it. Patrice met my eyes directly for the first time since I'd sat down. I wanted to see what he'd do next before I decided anything. And now I've met you. And I've heard what's happening to your daughter, and I don't need to think about it anymore. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, sliding it across the table toward me. The call log opened first. Norwood's number circled in her own handwriting on a torn piece of receipt paper beside it. And beneath it, a text he'd sent the next morning, following up, careful and polite, and unmistakably clear about what he was offering if she stayed quiet. I kept it, she said. Some part of me must have known I'd need to show somebody eventually. I'll tell Cordelia everything, she said. Formally. On record. I should have done it 9 years ago. I thanked her, my hands not quite steady now that the urgency had drained into something like relief, and drove straight to Cordelia's office to get everything documented before the day ended. What I didn't know yet, walking out of that cafe with the first real leverage I'd had since this began, was that Norwood already suspected someone had gotten to Patrice before he closed the loop himself. And that suspicion was about to make him far more dangerous than careful. Cordelia called me in for a meeting on a Wednesday morning and didn't sit down right away, which told me before she said a single word that something had shifted against us. Norwood's retained someone, she said. A firm out of Buckhead. Expensive, aggressive. The kind that wins by making things complicated rather than by being right. What did they file? A motion to suppress the facility records, Denise's testimony, the financial documentation, all of it. Cordelia finally sat, sliding a printout across the desk toward me. Their argument is that the records were obtained improperly, that Denise had no legal standing to disclose internal operations of a business, confidential or otherwise, and that anything built on her account is tainted. I read the filing twice, the legal language blurring slightly the longer I stared at it. Can they actually win that? It's not frivolous, Cordelia admitted, and I could hear how much it cost her to say it plainly instead of softening it for me. Denise signed a private employment confidentiality agreement when she was hired, separate from anything about licensing. Norwood's team is arguing she breached that agreement by talking to us, and that anything built on her account is fruit of that breach. It's a real argument. The judge could go either direction on it. If they win this motion, the financial trail and Denise's account both get significantly weaker as evidence. I sat very still, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel since the night I first watched that footage. Real doubt that this might not work, that Norwood's money and his careful lawyers might simply outlast my resolve. What about Patrice? Her testimony stands regardless. It's not tied to the facility's records. Cordelia's tone gentled slightly. But Thalia, if this motion succeeds, we lose the physical, financial proof of what happened to Aveline specifically. We'd be left arguing pattern and character without the hardest evidence we have. I left her office that afternoon, feeling something close to panic for the first time in weeks. Driving without any real destination, replaying every piece of this, the way you replay a fall right before you understand you're actually going to land wrong. My phone rang as I sat at a red light on Peachtree, an unknown number I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Sennett? The voice was familiar before he even said his name. It's Roscoe. I heard... Well, word travels in strange ways in a city like this, and someone mentioned there might be some kind of legal trouble with the case. There is, I admitted, too tired to pretend otherwise. I want to help, he said, no hesitation in his voice at all. I'll testify. About the camera, when I installed it, when I thought it had been disconnected, the timeline of when I found the footage and gave it to you. I should have offered before you had to ask. Relief moved through me so fast it nearly hurt, sharp and unexpected, like something clenched finally letting go. Roscoe, that would mean everything. I mean it, he said. Whatever happens with the facility's records, I can put a clear, honest timeline in front of that judge myself. Nobody can argue with when I installed that camera or when I found what was on it. I sat at that red light long after it turned green, other cars easing carefully around me, understanding that Roscoe's testimony wouldn't erase the risk we were facing, but it gave us a second leg to stand on if the first one buckled. The question that followed me home that night, refusing to quiet down, was whether a second leg would be enough if the judge ruled against us on the facility records entirely. The call came at 2:14 in the morning, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that whatever it was going to be bad. Mrs. Sennett? A woman's voice, brisk, professional, the kind trained to stay calm no matter what's on the other end of the line. This is Northside Hospital. We have your daughter here, Aveline Croft. You're listed as her emergency contact. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, running 2 yellow lights I would never normally risk, praying in a way I hadn't let myself pray in weeks, too afraid of what I might be praying against. The nurse, who met me in the hallway, had a careful, practiced gentleness that terrified me more than panic would have. "She's stable," she said quickly before I could ask. She came in unresponsive, but she's stable now. We got to her in time. We're running a full toxicology screen, standard for a presentation like this. And given some of what's come back so far, it's the kind of result we're required to report through. So you may hear from someone besides us before long. I didn't fully understand what she meant in that moment, too raw to hold on to anything beyond her first 3 words. I remember walking into that room and seeing my daughter small and pale under fluorescent light, tubes and monitors surrounding a body that had always seemed so much bigger than this to me, so much more alive. I sat beside her bed for over an hour before her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then slowly finding my face. "Mama?" Her voice came out cracked, younger than 26. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." She started crying before she said anything else, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere far past the surface of a single bad night. Years of something finally breaking loose all at once. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she whispered. "I don't even know how it got this bad." "You don't have to explain anything right now." "I do, though." Her hand found mine, weak but insistent. "I need you to know I heard you. That night you came to see me. I heard everything you said, even when I was yelling at you. I didn't know how to let it be true yet." I held her hand tighter, saying nothing, letting her find her own way through it instead of rushing her the way every instinct in me wanted to. "He's been giving me something," she said, so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. "I don't even know what exactly. He always said it would help me relax, help me sleep, help me stop hurting so much after the breakup. I trusted him. I actually trusted him, Mama." "I know, baby." The last few weeks, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Her eyes found mine, clearer now than they'd been in months, fear moving through them like something surfacing from very deep water. Tonight, I tried to tell him I wanted to stop, that I didn't want whatever this was anymore. What did he say? She didn't answer right away, and when she finally did, her voice dropped to almost nothing, like she was afraid the walls themselves might carry it back to him. "He got a look on his face I'd never seen before," she whispered. "And Mama, I'm scared of him. I don't think I ever let myself think that sentence until right now. But it's true. I'm scared of him." I sat there holding my daughter's hand in a hospital room at 4 in the morning. Every legal strategy, every piece of evidence, every plan Cordelia and I had built suddenly weighing nothing at all against the sound of my child finally telling me the truth. Whatever came next in that courtroom, I understood in that moment that the fight had never really been about winning. It had always been about getting her to say those exact words and getting her out safely once she finally did. Aveline agreed to the rehab program 2 days after she came home from the hospital, sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of tea she never drank, telling me quietly that she was ready to stop pretending she could handle this on her own. "I want to cooperate," she said, "with whatever Cordelia needs. I want to say it myself, not just have you say it for me." I hadn't let myself hope for that sentence. Not really. Not even after the hospital. Hearing it out loud felt like something unlocking in my chest that had been clenched shut for weeks. "You don't have to decide everything today," I told her. "I already decided." Her hands wrapped tighter around the mug. "I'm not doing this for you, Mama. I need you to know that. I'm doing it because I finally understand what he did to me, and I don't want to be the version of myself that let him do it." We spent that afternoon making calls, arranging admission to a program 2 hours outside the city. One Cordelia had vetted personally, quiet and private, far enough from Norwood's reach that he couldn't simply show up unannounced. He tried anyway. He called Aveline's phone 11 times that evening before she finally answered on the 12th, putting it on speaker without me asking her to, like she wanted a witness to whatever came next. "Baby, I've been so worried about you." Norwood's voice came through, warm and wounded, the exact tone he'd used on me 100 times before I learned to hear underneath it. "Your mother's telling people things that aren't true. I need you to help me understand what's happening, because I don't recognize the story she's telling." Aveline's jaw tightened, but she didn't hang up. "I told her what happened," she said. "Myself. Because it did happen, Norwood." "Aveline." His voice shifted, softer, more urgent, a man sensing ground slipping out from under him. "You know how confused you've been. You know how hard the last few months were on you. I never wanted to hurt you. Everything I did because I cared about you. And now your mother's twisting it into something ugly because she's never known how to just let you be happy." "Is that what you're going to tell people?" Aveline's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through it. "That I imagined all of it?" "I'm saying maybe we remember it differently," he said carefully. "Maybe if you just talked to my attorney, clarified a few things, this could all go away quietly, and none of us would have to sit through something as ugly as a courtroom." I watched my daughter's face while he spoke, watched something harden in her that hadn't been there even at the hospital, some final piece of her clicking into place. "No," she said. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected that word from her. Not that clean, not that final. "Aveline." "No, Norwood. I'm not clarifying anything for you. I'm not confused about what happened, and I'm not protecting you anymore." Her voice steadied with every word, gaining ground the longer she spoke. "I'm going to get better. And I'm going to tell the truth, all of it. And there's nothing you can say to me right now that's going to change that." She hung up before he could answer, setting the phone face down on the counter with a hand that trembled only slightly. I reached for her, and she let me hold her, both of us breathing hard in the quiet kitchen, understanding without needing to say it that something had just shifted for good. Whatever Norwood tried next, he was no longer trying to keep Aveline. He was trying to survive her. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, quieter, no audience beyond the people whose lives had actually been rearranged by what we were there to settle. I sat beside Cordelia at one table. Norwood sat across the room beside his buckhead attorney, his suit pressed, his face arranged into something calm that I now knew how to see straight through. Roscoe testified first. He walked the court through the timeline plainly, when he installed the camera, when he believed it disconnected, when he found the footage by accident and called me the same night. His voice never wavered. When Norwood's attorney tried to suggest the footage might have been tampered with, Roscoe simply said he'd hand over the original account credentials to anyone who wanted to verify it themselves, and the challenge died there. Denise testified next, despite the earlier motion against her. The judge had ruled 2 weeks prior that her testimony could stand, though the physical facility records remained partially restricted. A partial loss we'd braced for, softened considerably by everything else now in front of the court. She described the cash structuring plainly, without embellishment, and described what she'd witnessed of Aveline's decline with a steadiness that made it impossible to dismiss as exaggeration. Patrice testified after her, and I watched Norwood's face for the first time show something other than composure, a tightening around his jaw, a stillness that hadn't been there during Denise's testimony. Patrice described the settlement, the NDA, the phone call 3 days before we met, the careful offer of money dressed up as concern. She stated for the record that this was the same pattern, 9 years apart, down to the language he'd used. Then Aveline took the stand. I hadn't been sure until the moment she sat down, whether she'd be able to get through it. But she spoke clearly, describing the manipulation in her own words, the isolation, the fear she'd finally named in that hospital room, the phone call where she'd told him no for the first time and meant it. She didn't look at him once while she spoke. When she finished, she looked at me instead, and I nodded, and that was enough. Norwood's attorney tried, in cross-examination, to suggest her account was influenced by her mother, shaped by grief and anger rather than fact. Aveline answered without raising her voice. "My mother didn't tell me what to feel," she said. "She just helped me stop being afraid to say it." The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and very little patience for theater, addressed the room directly once closing arguments finished. "Given the parallel criminal charges already filed in this matter," she said, "this court is treating the civil and dissolution proceedings with appropriate urgency, rather than the standard timeline typically afforded these cases. I've heard sufficient testimony today to understand the scope and pattern alleged. I intend to review the full record carefully overnight." She looked briefly toward both tables. "I'll issue my ruling first thing tomorrow morning." The gavel came down softly, almost gently, nothing like the finality I'd imagined for months. Norwood didn't look at me on his way out. Aveline gripped my hand under the table until the room emptied around us. That night, I sat in my kitchen, unable to eat, unable to sleep, running every testimony back through my mind, searching for anything that could still go wrong. Tomorrow, one way or another, I would finally know if everything we'd built these past months was enough. The courtroom felt different that morning, sunlight coming through the high windows, in a way it hadn't the day before, like even the light knew something had shifted. The judge didn't waste time on preamble. "After careful review of the full record," she said, "this court finds the pattern of conduct alleged to be substantiated by credible, consistent testimony across multiple witnesses and multiple time periods. I am ordering the dissolution of marriage effective today, with equitable division of marital assets weighted significantly against the respondent, given clear evidence of financial concealment and misconduct throughout the marriage." She paused, turning a page. "Additionally, on the civil claims brought forth regarding coercive control and intentional harm, I am awarding judgment in favor of the petitioner equal to 50% of the respondent's total separate wealth. Inclusive of premarital assets as a direct penalty for conduct, this court finds to be deliberate, patterned, and predatory in nature. This is not a standard marital division. This is a consequence separate and apart from the marital estate itself. I felt Cordelia's hand find mine under the table, steadying, though I didn't need steadying anymore the way I once had. 2 rulings, she'd later explain plainly. One dividing what we'd built together, one punishing what he'd built alone to hurt us. And together, they meant Norwood would be walking away with a fraction of everything he once had. The judge continued, noting that the criminal matters, coercion, structuring, facilitation of dependency, would proceed separately through the district attorney's office, and that today's ruling would be entered into that record as supporting evidence. 2 officers were waiting quietly near the courtroom doors when Norwood stood. I didn't watch him being led out. I'd spent enough months of my life watching that man. I watched Aveline instead, sitting beside me, her spine straight, her eyes dry, a version of herself I hadn't seen in nearly a year. "It's over," she whispered, like she needed to hear the words out loud before she could believe them. "It's over," I said back. She started the rehab program 3 days later, the quiet one 2 hours outside the city, and I drove her there myself. Both of us mostly silent on the way, comfortable in a way silence hadn't been between us in months. Before she went inside, she hugged me longer than she needed to. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "Not today, but eventually." "I know, baby. I'll be right here the whole way." I threw myself back into Fontaine Realty Group over the following weeks, closing 2 developments I'd let slide during everything, rebuilding the parts of my life that had gone quiet while I fought for the parts that mattered more. The company hadn't just survived. It had waited for me, steady, the way I'd built it to be. Roscoe called once, a few weeks after the ruling, just to check in, no other reason. I told him I didn't think I'd ever be able to repay what he'd done for us. He said the debt didn't run that direction, that he'd simply done what any decent person would have. And I understood, hearing him say it, that decency like his was rarer than either of us wanted to admit. Aveline calls me every Sunday now from the program, her voice a little stronger each week, a little more like the daughter I remembered before any of this began. We don't talk about Norwood much. There's nothing left to say about him that the ruling didn't already say better. I sit some evenings now in the quiet of my own home, the one that once held so much I didn't see, and I think about how close I came to missing all of it. The calls, the flinches, the small, quiet lies dressed up as love. I didn't miss it. And because I didn't, my daughter is coming home.